Welcome to School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a voiceover artist, and a recovery coach. And I've been in recovery for many years, and I know firsthand that rock bottom can be the greatest teacher and the springboard for a beautiful life. And as you know, I invite fellow creatives, celebrities, and all inspiring people that have hit rock bottom, survived, and thrived. This is a podcast of hope and about how to get out of the darkness into the light. And I'm so excited today because I've got the glittering Georgia Locke in the studio.
Hi, I really like glittering, thank you.
She is glittering. She's just an embodiment of just wonder and joy.
Oh, stop it.
And if you don't know who Georgia Locke is, well, shame on you. But a very quick bio before we just jump straight in. Okay, so Georgia Locke is an actor and OCD advocate living in London. She began her career on CBBC at the age of 13 and went on to work with the Disney Channel in various shows. And credits include Sadie J, The Evermore Chronicles, and the voice of Sadie Sparks, with new projects being announced this year. Watch this space. An avid poet, Georgia won a competition in 2019 to have a small collection of her poetry published and is now working on a second collection for the publisher. She also writes music, which is often inspired by mental health struggles, and has run poetry workshops for OCD UK and was a panellist at the OCD Action Conference. Wow. Now, Georgia, I know you're a fan of the show, and I've pre-warned you that I tend just to kind of get straight to the meat of the subject straight away. Obviously, I've invited you on because you're an incredible creative and actress, but also you're on your own mental health journey with OCD. I wondered if we could start with your darkest rock bottom moment that OCD has taken you to. And then from there, we're going to get into the recovery and into the light and into the joy.
Sure. Yeah. Well, OCD arrived in my life 5 years ago now. And I think the rock bottom moment was just appearing. Obviously, at the time, I didn't know it was OCD because OCD is constantly misused, misrepresented. It's always in the media, we see it all the time, that there's these incorrect phrases and it's just thrown around so casually. So when it arrived in my life, I had no idea that it was OCD and I just thought I was going crazy. And what it was New Year's Eve, 2018 going into 2019. And we'd just done the New Year's Eve countdown. I was with my wonderful partner at the time and his friends. And 10, 9, 8, got to 1. And then I felt my brain just switch. Like I felt it go. I felt it click and I didn't understand what was happening. But it was New Year's Eve, had a glass of wine, thought maybe I'm just feeling a little bit weird and I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll be back to normal. 5 years on, that wasn't the case. I'm doing much better. It's really night and day to how it was when it first arrived. But it was the weirdest feeling. And I kept saying, all I could really say at the time to my boyfriend and my parents was, my brain's broken. I couldn't figure out how else to phrase it. I just kept saying, my brain's broken. My brain's broken. I don't understand. My brain's broken. I couldn't, there were no other words to articulate it. And I was very lucky and found out pretty quickly. Well, now it didn't feel quick at the time. It felt like forever. But I found out within a couple of months that what I was going through was OCD, which is a complete blessing because average diagnosis time is 17 years, Whoa. Which is just heartbreaking on so many levels. And after I realized that it was OCD and I started researching it, this sentence kept coming up. I kept seeing this sentence in articles. I remember the day my brain broke. In so many different places. Oh, my brain broke one day. It's just, and it seems really fascinating to me that it seems to come up a lot with a lot of people with OCD. This sentence seems to always crop up. This, I remember the day my brain broke, and it really did feel that way. And I mean, it was absolutely hellish. I just thought I was going completely insane. I was thinking, God, how am I going to tell my parents that their only child's gone crazy? I was trying to, it felt like, I don't know if you've seen The Matrix. I think there's a scene where there's like a ship and it's scanning for other ships or something. I remember it just felt like my body was just constantly scanning 24/7 for proof of wrongdoing or proof that I was bad. And it was trying to cook up all these different things. And I didn't really feel like I knew who I was anymore. I've always quite enjoyed my own company, like a solo holiday. And suddenly I was so terrified to be alone. I sort of joked to my partner, it makes me want to put cameras in the house so I can watch them back at the end of the day and make sure that I've not done anything bad. It's that feeling of completely not trusting yourself or your mind. And I mean, when you don't feel safe in your own body, it's just absolutely terrifying. And I was trying to come to terms with the fact that I thought I would never be happy again, because I really believed it. And I think my whole memory of this time now is quite foggy because it was really traumatic. And so I'm not quite sure at what point things happened, but I remember truly believing, I think this is before I knew what it was, just truly believing that I would never be able to actually be happy again. But I thought, well, the only way to then move forward is just to really try and accept that. And so I'd say to myself, well, you know what? You've had 22 years. It arrived when I was 22. So you've had 22 years of knowing, you've smiled in that time, and that's okay. And now you're never going to be able to actually laugh again, but that's all right. You've had 22 years, that's okay. And I really truly believed that. And it was so odd because I had no sense of self. I would feel so guilty all the time. I couldn't really eat. I lost a lot of weight very fast. I couldn't really walk. I couldn't walk properly for a long time. Like a 5-minute walk would take me half an hour because every 2 seconds I have to look at the ground and get on the ground and check stuff. And it was just the most bizarre feeling. Sometimes I would have to walk with my eyes shut because I felt totally overwhelmed, which obviously, knowing now that's a compulsion and that's not helpful and that's going to make it worse. And I'd be so stuck in thoughts that, again, didn't know what I was going through. So I used to ask my boyfriends, because I'd be stuck in these thoughts all the time. And then they would, because when you're thinking about something all the time, it infiltrates your dreams as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I had no break from it. I'd be stuck in this one thought constantly, all day long. And then all night I would dream about it, and it would be the first thing I thought about when I woke up. And it was just a mental prison. And I didn't know how to get out of it. And so I would ask my boyfriend to just wake me up in the morning by shouting a random word. Just because in my head I was like, maybe I'll have a few seconds of respite, just to be like, oh, why is he shouting that for? Just in case that would give me just a millisecond of not thinking about it. Obviously, since I learned what it was, have learned about the condition, I know that was a compulsion and that was not helpful. And was ultimately making it worse. But when you're in that place and you don't know what you've got and you don't know how to help yourself, I was just trying anything. But that's why I love to talk about OCD now, because I honestly, like the idea of a 17-year wait to get that diagnosis, I don't know where I'd be. I really, and it's a scary thing to think about. Happy to be here. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I would have had no idea. It would never have crossed my mind that what I was going through was OCD. I just thought that I was close to going insane. And so that's why I really like to talk about it as much as I can.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it sounds absolutely harrowing and terrifying what you're describing, particularly it just coming on a pin drop.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like. Going back to the analogy of, like you described it, my brain broke one day. If we go back and use that analogy and just kind of really simplify it, maybe for somebody that doesn't know anything about OCD who's listening. So if your brain is working, not broke, if we use this analogy, I suppose you might argue that it's sort of rational and it's calm, at peace, joyous and all of that. What was the main symptom of it being broke? If you had to pick one, what was the sort of, if you had to deduce it to one element that you realised that it was broke and you concluded it was broke? I appreciate that's an incredibly hard question.
No, it's interesting. And I think that's why I find that sentence so interesting, that it comes up so much with OCD, because it really is hard to articulate what it feels like. And I think part of it is that, you know, for me and for it does happen quite a lot for people that it just arrives one day. Obviously, some people have had it for as long as they can remember, but for some people it does seemingly sort of show up. And so I think that adds to the feeling of it breaking, because it's just suddenly like, oh, things are like, this is different. I think for me, I felt like I was drowning, and I felt in thoughts, and I felt like my mind was just completely against me, and I was feeling there's so much guilt, which is really common with OCD, and I couldn't quite place why. I felt so guilty, like just so like I'd done something terrible, but I also couldn't think what the terrible thing was. And then my brain would try and come up with reasons why I should feel terrible. But it was so bizarre. You know, even if I was sort of 5 minutes late to meet someone, I would feel, which seems so silly, you know, I know that, but I would feel like it's so bizarre with OCD because the feeling is real. Like what it's actually about isn't really that's not real. Like it's illogical, right? Mm-hmm. But the feeling is real. And so I remember I was crying once on the phone to my dad because I was running 5 minutes late, and I was like, but Dad, I just feel so guilty about this. Like it's absolutely unbearable, this guilt that I feel. And he said, well, Georgia, you know, just try and take some deep breaths. And I was like, but Dad, I don't feel like I deserve to take deep breaths. Like, you know, you don't feel like you deserve to calm down because you sort of, it's telling you that you're this terrible person and that you deserve to feel anxious, you know. And it's, so I think the brokenness for me was just this, I just didn't feel safe in my own body, and I didn't trust myself. And I think that was the thing.
So would it be an oversimplification to kind of say that it was more intrusive thoughts as a kind of the first kind of main symptom as opposed to compulsions? I don't want to sort of break it down too narrowly and be too simplistic, but I know, you know, a lot of people understand that OCD is about intrusive thoughts and then compulsions and things like that. It sounds like it was more about intrusive thoughts at the beginning, that you weren't a good person and you felt guilty.
Yeah.
Did compulsions come later, or did they come at the same time, or did they never arrive for you?
No, I think the thing is, with those, that's a good point, because so obsessions, intrusive unwanted thoughts, and then the compulsions are the acts that you feel you have to do, you have to carry out in order to relieve yourself from the anxiety brought on by the intrusive thought. Yeah. What's really important to mention is that you always, if you have OCD, compulsions are present, but they can be mental. Like a lot of my compulsions are mental compulsions. I have physical compulsions as well, but you know, so for example, the idea of a mental compulsion is if you get this idea, oh gosh, I'm a really bad person, then you can, if you then start to go back and check through all your memories and make sure and try and find evidence that you are good, that in itself, you're doing a compulsion, you're engaging. A lot of people, you know, sort of an element of OCD is called pure O, which describes people that have there's a bit of controversy about the name. I think it's good to differentiate people that don't have physical compulsions. Or maybe not good, but, you know, it can be perhaps useful. But the thing with purely obsessional OCD is that there are still compulsions. They're just mental. And so a lot of that is something I really struggle with. So I was thought checking all the time. Rumination is a big compulsion. But what's difficult, and obviously physical compulsions also really difficult, but with mental compulsions, I think it can feel, I personally really struggle with them because they can almost feel automatic. You know, you don't want to be engaging with them, and it doesn't sometimes feel like it is a compulsion you're doing. It feels like it's just happening to you. Yeah. But when you're ruminating, you are doing that, and I've always really struggled with that. And so I actually saw a quote last night. I've always really struggled with how to not ruminate. And my therapists have said, just drop the rope, and I've always understood that concept, but I've always thought there's going to be a sentence one day where I can really actually grasp that and put that into practice. And I saw this quote that was just, the thoughts aren't bothering you, you're bothering the thoughts. And now some people won't like that, but I actually really enjoy that, because that for me felt a bit like, oh, actually, I have some power here. Let me just leave the thoughts alone, which probably, that may not help some people, but for me, I found that helpful.
Yeah, it's hugely helpful and very insightful. And I think that's really important while we're having this conversation, because there's so many stereotypes about OCD, and it's really important to break that stigma down, that it's far more complex than what, some people in the media, frivolously refer to, that it's just about light checking and putting things in a certain order. As you've just demonstrated very articulately with your own experience, there's so many layers to this onion, and it's so multifaceted. I want to go back to something you said a minute ago. I don't want to misquote you, but I think you said you've always sort of ruminated a little bit. You've always been thinking. The reason I bring that up is obviously so far in our story, in our conversation, it would be quite easy to kind of conclude that 1 minute you didn't have it, and then it struck midnight, and then you had it. And obviously that is your experience, that's what happened. But I just wondered, without sort of trying to psychoanalyze you too much, right, if there is any kind of, I don't want to call them a red flag, but kind of little red flags prior to that moment that you think were maybe pointers or markers of potential OCD later. For example, the overthinking, the ruminating, the anxiety. Were things like that present before?
So rumination was definitely something that came more after this day on New Year's Eve. That being thought stuck that's how I refer to it, is horrific, and that is something, that's why I consider that OCD arrived that day, because my world changed that day, and it's not been the same since, and it's been a very tough time to keep going. But definitely previously, looking back in hindsight, there are things that make me see that OCD was always kind of lurking around in my body, and it, then just arrived one day. And I think it was probably inevitable for me and for my life that it would have shown up one day. But there were things like, I had a period when I was about 19, or maybe a bit younger, maybe like 17, 18, where I couldn't stop thinking about fainting. Now, at the time, I thought that I was just a bit dizzy and was a bit weak. So I'd go to the doctor and say, well, I'm worried about fainting. I feel like I could faint all the time. But looking back, I know now that actually I wasn't worried about fainting. It was, it's hard to phrase. It was more, what if I faint? What if I faint? Right. And it was OCD completely. Yeah. But I was obviously dealing with it in the wrong way, because I believed that it was actually about what I thought it was about. There's a really good quote about OCD that I love, that's, don't get bogged down in content. OCD shouts about all kinds of different things to all kinds of, to everyone, but the way in which it talks is the same, right, I think. And it's never about what it's shouting about. So it can feel like, and when it's so consuming and so convincing, it can really get you. So sometimes if I'm checking the taps off, 100 times before I leave my house, it can feel like the tap is the problem. The tap isn't the problem. Right. OCD is the problem. Sure. And so, checking compulsions are something that was definitely in my life before, for maybe about, I actually can't even guess a time, for probably a couple of years before OCD arrived. Yeah. It did take me a long time to leave my house because I was checking everything. So that was probably the first thing. Also, things like going to museums would be really hard for me, because I would feel like I had to read everything. I don't know why. It would just fill me with extreme anxiety if I felt like I couldn't do that. So there have been times, again, in museums or wherever there's lots of information, shutting my eyes and trying to walk, which obviously isn't a good idea. Yeah. And things like that. There's just been moments where I think, oh, okay, that was OCD. And sort of crossing the line from sort of, stuff that's maybe pre-OCD into OCD. I'm going to try and think of an example of something I do. So there's a cupboard at a place that I work that I have to lock, and it's got some important stuff in there. And I have to check 10 times. I have to rattle it 10 times before I know that it's locked. Now, I know that's not OCD because
it actually solves the issue. And I from my research of OCD, that when you do a compulsion to relieve the intrusive thought, it just makes it worse. It's like scratching a bite. Would that be a marker? So, for example, before, maybe you were checking the taps, you checked them a few times, and you actually felt okay. Whereas now, would it be more of a case that it would feed into the compulsion if you were then, or the obsession if you were to do the compulsion? Am I overcomplicating it now?
No. I think ultimately, at whatever point, like they know of memory, the more that you check something, the less sure you become. So I think at any point, obviously compulsions the reason they're so tempting and it's so hard to resist them is because they feel like they can provide some kind of relief.
Yeah.
Right? And so, yes, there will be a point where you think, okay, I feel better now and now I can leave. But really, whenever you're doing that, you're feeding into it. It's never going to be good to do that. Because also, the thing with OCD is it's never enough for it. Like, you can never satisfy it. Yeah. So I used to then not trust my senses. So like with the taps, for example, I'd run my hands a few times. I'd be like, okay, taps off. And then I'd look at my hand and I'd be like, hold on, is this wet? Is this wet? And I would try and touch it and see, do I just not realize? Is it? And then I wouldn't be able to trust that enough. So I'd go and get some tissue because I feel like tissue, it's easier to tell if it's wet because my hands may be a bit cold. So maybe that's why I'm thinking it. So then I'd put some tissue under it. Okay, hold on. Wait, but is the tissue wet? I can't tell, and it's just never enough. And it can convince you, I can check a window a billion times. Oh, but what if the window's still open? Well, no, it's not. I've checked it. What if your eyes were lying to you? What if you can't trust your eyes? What if they were lying? Right. And then how, you can't logic your way out of an illogical problem. And that's why you can't use logic with OCD. You have to embrace the fact that it's about doubt at its crux. And you've just got to learn it's about learning to tolerate doubt. Ultimately, that's what OCD is.
So interesting. I mean, anxiety is something that I've struggled with before. It's not so bad now. And obviously that's a very separate thing. I mean, we talked about this off air, didn't we? If sort of anxiety is a circle and then OCD, they're separate circles, but there might be a little moment where there's a little crossover. Even like with body dysmorphia and things like that, checking is such a big thing with body dysmorphia. I don't like this part of my body and I'm going to keep looking in the mirror to look for evidence that there's something wrong, or there's like complete avoidance. You don't look in the mirror. It's interesting with the human mind that there can be these little moments, of crossover. I mean, again, it's a very different thing, but, it reminded me of when I go on holiday and I know that my house isn't going to be occupied for a week or two, I have to video me locking certain things. Oh, yeah. I need video evidence. Oh. So like I'll go in the shower and I'll turn the shower off and then I'll go around and do a video and go, shower's off. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, I don't know what that means. Is that just anxiety or is that low-level OCD?
I don't know. I'd be wary of that though.
Yeah.
Like maybe. I mean, look. I obviously I'm not a doctor, but one of my biggest compulsion. Well, not my biggest compulsion, but one of the first ones I managed to tackle was the fact that I had about 80 pictures of each switch. I used to have to do that. When I was leaving the house, I would take pictures of the switches. But obviously for OCD, it's not enough. So again, like with your eyes lying to you, like I said earlier, right. Well, what if you took that picture and then you went back and turned it on? So I would have about 80 pictures of the same switch and the same tap and everything. And that was one of the first things that I managed to sort of cut out, but it was really hard because it felt really irresponsible because as soon as you try and resist OCD, hold on, but why would you not check that? Like that's really dangerous. What kind of person are you? But that's what it likes to do.
I mean, that sounds absolutely exhausting. I mean, I think in my...
I'm tired.
And I just take my hat off to you for the strength you have to get through this because, I mean, when I'm talking, about my situation where I'm videoing things, it was a bit distressing at the time. And then the reason I'd do it is I'd then be in the taxi going to the airport and my brain would go... You didn't do any of those things. Yeah. And then I go back on my phone and I watch the video and I get reassurance and then I'm done.
Oh, then you're done. Okay, that's okay.
But then I'm done. And that's how I know it's not
become,
And even that I find distressing. Yeah. Just that level of anxiety and that check and that, because it's like, that's 5 minutes of my life.
Right.
So, I just massively applaud you.
Oh, thank you.
I was going to talk about this later, but I think we're on the subject now. Is this what false memory OCD is? Is that what we're talking about?
I mean, now? I don't know. OCD instills doubt constantly anyway. So that false memory OCD is a common theme in OCD. So OCD can present itself in lots of ways, and whatever theme it comes up with, or subtype, whatever you want to call them, is kind of irrelevant. But I say that delicately because obviously there are lots of like more taboo themes that are perhaps harder to talk about because they're met with such judgment. But it's the reason I say they're irrelevant is because the content of the thoughts doesn't mean anything. Like we were saying earlier, don't get bogged down in content. OCD is OCD, but we do group them into themes and subtypes for ease of talking about them, really, and so people can feel less alone. You know, when someone has the same theme, there can be a bit of kinship there, and you can feel more supported. But
I'm sorry to interrupt. No. We will put links in the show notes to like OCD Action, OCD UK. So if you want to go through all of those subtypes in detail, we'll put a link there. Sorry to interrupt.
That'd be great. No, thank you. Yeah. And also to point out that your subtype might not even be listed. Like OCD can attack anything in the world as if it's important to you. And that's the cruel thing of this disorder. If something is important to you and you care about it, it's going to go after it. Like it goes after things we love. It's ego dystonic, right? So actually it's going against your values. That's why so often and that's why the thoughts feel so distressing. It's the fear that makes them sticky. Yeah. So that's why it can go after people that we love, because we're so worried about hurting them and we're so concerned, and it's so not what we want. That's why they feel so loud and so scary. Yeah. And so I just think it's important that it can really be about anything. But false memory OCD is a subtype that is pretty common, and it can just be these thoughts of, gosh, they can sound a bit like, what if I did something terrible last week and just don't remember it? Gosh, what if this happened and I just don't remember? And it can be really, really distressing, because then if you sort of revisit a memory, and that's a mental compulsion of just checking the memory, then the more we check something again, as I said, you become less sure, and it can kind of turn dust into dynamite, or not even dust. It will just create stuff. Yeah. And it's very scary.
It's a great phrase, dust into dynamite. Oh. And I think, as well, a sort of a key thing, because I think intrusive thoughts are quite common for a lot of people, right? So I think
it's a human part of the human experience.
Yeah. And I know some people, even with anxiety, they worry about these thoughts. But it sounds like the emotion and the physical emotional response that is then attached to that thought sounds really painful. Whereas maybe someone who's suffering with anxiety or just an intrusive thought, it will come in and they go, well, that's a bit weird, and then it will go out. But with OCD, you're replaying it, you're investigating it. It's just going round and round and round. Yeah,
ultimately, you're just giving it way too much attention and too much. Is credence the right word? Or credits? Yeah. Credence, your people with OCD, because everyone has intrusive thoughts, but they're so, because we have thousands of thoughts a day, but they're so insignificant. That people can kind of just be, that was a bit weird, or not even think that, just carry on with their day. But people with OCD, they falsely interpret these thoughts to have some kind of meaning or say something about them as a person, when a thought is just a thought and it doesn't mean anything. And so, now I've lost my train of thought. But they...
I tell you what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you. No. Just so people understand, or maybe if someone is struggling with intrusive thoughts themselves, you don't have to share this, but what would you say your most distressing intrusive thought has been?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's so hard to pinpoint. I feel like my OCD is, I've just had a smorgasbord of all the themes, and whatever one you're in often feels like the worst one, right? Yeah, right. But you're it can cook up anything, and it's
sort of mainly about harming people you love, would you say?
I think my biggest themes are moral scrupulosity. I really struggle with that, worrying about being good and doing the right thing when we live in a world of grey anyway. There's good and bad. Like, these are very kind of childlike terms, Yeah. And so, it can be also, I find there's a thing when OCD can go meta. that I find quite difficult, and it can come up in different ways. But for me, my sort of the biggest one I'm facing at the moment is, oh my gosh, but what if I'm now thinking about this forever? Like the thing I'm so scared of is almost OCD itself, you know?
I get that.
So it's
the reason I say get that is because I've shared on this podcast before, I was diagnosed with panic disorder in my 20s. I haven't had a panic attack in a decade.
Oh, great.
Which I'm really, really grateful for. But, and again, I'm not saying by any stretch it's in any way the same thing, but a lot of my panic attacks back then, I was panicking about the panic attack.
Right, yes, okay. So, yeah.
You know, the panic was the panic attack. I was terrified of the panic attack. And that worry of the panic attack caused the panic attack.
And that's what's so difficult.
Yeah.
And I think with in terms of that for OCD, again, the way to deal with OCD like ERP is meant to be the best treatment for OCD, which is exposure response prevention. And this is exposing yourself to the things that might cause you distress, and then not doing the compulsions, and just teaching yourself that you can deal with it. Oh yeah, I've done it. But that's how I can walk. That's how I can. Like I couldn't. There was a lot of food, even after. So when I was really ill with OCD and I first got it, I think I said I couldn't eat for a while, but that's because of the guilt that I was feeling. I really, my throat was so blocked that I just couldn't really eat. And then as I started to get better and I was able to eat, then it started attacking food in different ways. So there were certain foods that I couldn't eat because what if I'm suddenly allergic and it's going to kill me, even though I know I'm not allergic, but you know, that fear. And then also, obviously, if you want to be vegetarian, that's a choice. But at that time, I knew that it wasn't a choice. I just felt really evil anytime I ate meat. Like I felt really evil. Right. But and so, you know, some people watching might be like, well, yes, if they you know, strong. But that you know, we have our own different things, and that was something really hard. So I had to really battle. There were certain foods that I couldn't eat because it made me bad, and it was a real struggle. And when you're doing ERP, you know, it's not a pleasant experience. The times that I've carried on walking when I'm so desperate to turn around, just absolutely in tears. It's a real struggle. But I think the thing that's so odd about, well, not odd, but the thing that's really hard with OCD and guilt, I've brought up guilt a lot because that's one of the ways that it really, for me, guilt is the thing that is hardest to deal with about OCD. And I think it's interesting because guilt, technically, like evolutionarily, is that a word? Yeah. Is the thing that tells us we've done something wrong, right? And we kind of in society, you know, that's why people are like it's an important feeling, I suppose, for people to sort of function. Anyway, so when that's misfiring, that's really hard to ignore because it's the thing that says, oh, there's wrongdoing that's happening here. So when that's not true, that feels really hard to ignore. I've heard it said before. I think OCD is a feeling problem, not a thinking problem. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a misquote, but it's it's really when you feel, because the fear is real. It's illogical, but the feeling is so hard.
Do you know, I am yet to meet anybody, even with anxiety for that matter, but certainly with OCD, who's not just a lovely person. I mean, I'm sure they exist, right? Because
I think they have to, yeah.
But I'm yet to find anyone who's got OCD, and I even struggle with high anxiety yet, that isn't a lovely person, because I know it's an oversimplification, but the majority seem to just really deeply care and want to do the right thing. Because even by that barometer that you just said, you know, it's because you don't want to feel guilty because you just care so much. You've got a big heart. And so I find that really, really interesting as well. And the fact that all these intrusive thoughts, you know, and there's a lot of stats to back this up, you know, people with OCD are the least likely to do those things as well.
Yeah.
And of course, with mental health, you know, logic doesn't always come, or it never comes into it when you're suffering.
No,
you know?
You can't.
Just kind of going back a little bit before the OCD. I mean, obviously your career as an actress has just been like sensational, really.
Oh,
like,
thank you.
In the sense that you started so young.
Yeah.
You know, you're 13, you're at CBBC, you know, then you're at the Disney Channel, you're presenting, you're doing all these TV shows and acting as well, and you still continue to do so. But I sort of imagine that sort of 13 to adulthood as just being a whirlwind of excitement. Could that, in a way, have kind of like distracted you from OCD in some way? Do you think that you were on such a buzz from your career that OCD was kind of put on the shelf? Or
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think common onset ages for OCD, if you can have had it forever, or like it can arrive maybe sort of, I think commonly between 11, 12, that age, and then teens to early adulthood.
Yeah.
And I think it just, they don't know what causes OCD. You know, they're not sure why it happens. But yeah, I think I definitely feel better when I'm working, or usually anyway. I find that when I feel more confident within myself, it's easier the OCD is quieter, and it's easier to sort of ignore it. But
interesting.
But I do think that it just arrived when it arrived. Yeah.
I mean, one definition of OCD that I think you like, because it's on your Instagram. Everyone go to George's Instagram. There's a lot of stuff about OCD, but also lots of lovely other things as well. Your poetry, your singing, and go there now.
Thanks.
But yeah, I'm just trying to. I don't want to misquote this. OCD is an intolerance to doubt.
Yeah,
is that right? So, you know, we're in the acting industry, right? So. The whole thing's a doubt.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the entertainment industry? I mean, obviously, like you just say, when you're working, it's all gravy. Well, not all gravy. It's better. It's better. How do you deal with the uncertainty of the industry?
I feel like they're kind of two different forms of doubt, really. I mean, it's difficult when you're acting and you don't know what's coming next, and that's hard. But the doubt about being a good person, or the doubt about trusting myself, you know, is
a much bigger doubt than am I going to get this part?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the same thing to me.
Gotcha.
I think what's a description of OCD as well that I quite like is there's a French psychiatrist, actually, before I think OCD had been coined. He described it as le folie de doute, which is like the madness of doubt, which I think I like to bring that up when I talk about OCD, because obviously it has become so associated with, let me straighten up this mug, you know. And some people can have symmetry compulsions, but the misconception of people with OCD liking things tidy is the problem. Like, nothing to do with OCD is about enjoyment or liking something, you know. So I like to throw in pretty quickly, it used to be called the madness of doubt, because people are confused by that often, because it has become so linked to enjoying order, which isn't the case.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, going back to your social media, I've done some professional stalking, which I like to do, and you've got a lovely highlights bit called OCD on your Instagram, and I just sort of went through there and just picked out a few things which I thought might be interesting for the listeners and viewers. We've already talked about the day that your brain broke in a lot of detail. I mean, some of these, you know, will probably be quite quick fire, and some of these you'll want to dive into a bit more. One of them was something that you posted, and it said, "Don't believe everything you think."
Yeah, I believed that. You know, thoughts aren't facts.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost a lot with OCD. You can have a thought and it can feel like the truth, and it can feel so terrifying. And it's not the case. Like, a thought is just a thought. It doesn't really mean anything.
And it's so important to hear that, because I think a lot of people that aren't forced to learn this stuff because they don't have a mental health condition and have to recover from, a lot of people don't realise that. You know, they think thoughts are facts.
Yeah.
And that causes them a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
So to hear someone like you say that they're not, when you really know, will help somebody.
I hope so.
You know, I sometimes work with young people or even people in rehabs, and they'll be describing these thoughts to me, and they're really just stressing them, and they're describing them like they're real.
Yeah.
And I often say in my kind of therapist role that, you know, your mind is the sky and your thoughts are clouds.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and they come and they pass.
It's just all about observing without judgment, I think, which can be so hard when it feels so scary.
Is that where your recovery sits at the moment? Is it getting that distance between being the thoughts and the observer of your thoughts? Is that one of the main sort of shifts now?
I think so. I mean, I think that's really important. I think the phrase, I know I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but don't get bogged down in content has just something my therapist used to say. I think was just so helpful to me, because it just highlights that whatever it's screaming about, whatever OCD is screaming about, isn't the problem. OCD is the problem. And I find that really comforting, because especially OCD, you can just feel like you're going nuts and that you feel very isolated in it. So then learning that it's OCD, I saw a therapist, and this was really early on when I didn't know what was going on, and she was actually the wrong kind of therapist. Like traditionally, that sort of talking therapy isn't helpful for OCD, right? Usually, very usually. But obviously, I can't say all the time. But it's not, statistically, talking therapy is not good for OCD, because it's giving loads of power to these thoughts, right? Because it's analysing them, and we don't want that. We just want to be, thoughts are thought. But so at first, when I learned that I had the condition, I then was a bit angry that I'd ever seen her, because I was like, that wasn't helpful for me. But then I learned more about the condition, and I realised how misdiagnosed it is, how long it goes undiagnosed. And I just realised that this woman, thank goodness, like wrong kind of therapy for me, but third session with her, she just went, oh, I wonder if this might be OCD. And that sentence, like nothing is ever going to be more valuable to me in my life.
Absolutely.
Like she really saved my life saying that. And I remember I went home and I Googled it, and I was like, I remember I went to my boyfriend's work. I was crying. I was like, this is it. This is what's happening. This is what's happening to me. And it was just insane. So I think what's really helped in recovery is knowledge of the disorder, just learning about it, and.
So therapy has been something you've had. You talked about the exposure.
Yeah, exposure response prevention. Really, really important.
Obviously, this is your private medical information. You don't have to share. Is medication played any role? You don't have to answer that. No pressure to answer that.
I was prescribed, oh gosh, what's it called? Fluoxetine? I think it's basically like a Prozac.
Gotcha.
But one of the things OCD doesn't like me taking stuff.
Sure.
It gets very scared about things. Like I struggle even really to take a paracetamol when I'm in pain, because it's like, well, what if it sends you crazy?
Yeah.
But it's something that I am really interested in, and actually it's been a big old journey the past 5 years, and I'm really night and day to how I was when it first arrived in my life. Yeah. But the last couple of months, things have been feeling a little bit stickier, and I have really been thinking about it. And it's something that I'm really interested in, that I'm going to maybe do some more research into. There's quite a lot of studies happening at the moment with OCD treatments, because there's never really been a medication specifically for OCD. Yeah. So I think that's something that's there's some clinical trials happening at the moment, which if they work could be amazing.
That sounds really promising. Yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on that. I mean, I'm going to jump ahead here just purely because we're on the topic. You wrote the comfort of community, or you took a screenshot of an article that said the comfort of community. Has that been another part of your recovery? So, some therapies that you've talked about, but also finding a community, a supportive community.
Oh, completely. Right. Yeah, that's actually, it's a line from a poem that I wrote. Starts off, the comfort of community is something that is new to me. And it's just finding other people, because it's such a weird disorder and it can feel so isolating and it's so misunderstood. So when you are then with people and you meet people who understood this incredibly misunderstood thing, it's phenomenal. And I've met some brilliant friends in the OCD community, and I think finding them, that's one of the things that social media is brilliant for. Finding people that know the pain of this thing is really special, and it really helps me for sure.
That's amazing. So is that kind of what your ongoing maintenance looks like in terms of just kind of, keeping yourself, healthy mentally, physically, and everything else. Is that what it's about for you now? Obviously, we talked about it earlier on that, you've been running poetry workshops in the past with OCD UK. You're a panelist on OCD Action. You've got this community. You do your poetry. You've got your singing, which is often inspired by OCD.
Yeah.
Is that all part of the maintenance?
I think so. I think I really... I think the main thing, there's a great therapist called Kimberly Quinlan. She's on Instagram. Your Anxiety Toolkit, I think, is her name.
Yes.
Do you know her? Yeah, she's brilliant. And
I think she has a podcast as well.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
Went on a couple of years ago. She's great, and she always says it's a beautiful day to do hard things. The thing with OCD, it's so easy for your world to get so small so fast. So it's basically I try and just do scary things every day, and obviously that might be using a fork that I think is dangerous, or it could be any number of things, but just trying to do something that is a little bit scary every day to show yourself and give yourself evidence that you can handle it. So often with anxiety, we overestimate the problem and underestimate our ability to cope. And it's just giving yourself evidence that, oh, okay, I can handle this. So I think there's that I just try and keep going with. And also, the poetry definitely, I find it can take the power away from OCD sometimes. When I feel really trapped with it and it's giving me a really hard time, I feel like if I can, put a little bit of it into art of some kind, it's sort of taking the power back a bit.
That totally makes sense. I had a spoken word artist, shout out to TMO if you're listening. We did one on grief, and she was suffering with complex grief from the sudden loss of her mum, and she uses painting and spoken word, and she said the pain is in the poem, not in this one, or the pain is in the art, not in this one. And so I love that healing power of creativity that has actually been a bit of a theme throughout a lot of these conversations I've been having. I'm just unfortunately conscious of time because we're running out of time.
Sorry, I've been
over another 10. That's absolutely fine.
Oh, that's lovely. I don't know if you
Sorry.
heard our producer, lovely George, there, giving me a complimentary 10 minutes, which is wonderful.
Hey,
thank you, George. That's really kind of you. So there's a couple more here. One is from a poem that you wrote. Everyone go and check out George's poetry. It's lovely.
Oh, thank you.
So I've literally just nicked a couple of little bits. And I'm sorry if I've misquoted you. A song gets stuck in your head, but instead of a song, it's a sea of torment.
Yeah.
That sounds harsh.
Yeah, scene of torment. Because it's so weird when it just plays these things on loop. And because the whole thing, like thought suppression doesn't work. The whole thing with don't think of pink elephants. Yeah. As soon as you, oh God, I really don't want to think about this, then it's going to be louder. It just loves when you do that. So that's why the power of maybe is really important with OCD. And because it plays into this idea that thoughts are just thoughts, which is true.
Yeah.
And so if you just try not to engage with them, oh yeah, maybe. Do you know what? Maybe. Yeah. Then it eventually will get quieter, but it will feel really irresponsible to do that at first, especially because OCD attacks what we love. So, an example of an obsession might be about to go to sleep, next to your partner. Oh my God, what if I kill my partner in my sleep? That would be so horrible. That would be so awful. And then the compulsion would be to stay awake all night to make sure that doesn't happen. When really what you need to be doing is going, maybe, which can sound crazy and can sound, really, and OCD will say, oh, that's really irresponsible of you. Does that mean you actually want to kill him? Why would you even think that? Mm-hmm. But it's all white noise. It's all nonsense. And you just can't feed into it. Just maybe, and then you go to sleep, and that's what the best thing to do is.
Wow, that's really, really interesting, actually. That, and I suppose life is always a bit of a maybe, isn't it? If you I can be guilty of that sometimes, sort of taking life a little bit too seriously and over-analysing things. And people that have been in long-term recovery in the communities I'm in, they'll talk about, wearing life like a loose overcoat and things like that. And I love that because I have to remind myself to do that as well.
I think it's true.
It's not real, but demons scream all the same.
I think that's one of the hardest things about OCD is so often what you're doing is illogical, but you just can't stop it. you know you don't need, you've checked the stove 100 times and you don't need to check it again. You know you weren't mean to someone the other day, but you can't stop replaying it. And it's just, that's sort of one of the things that makes it so trapping, is that a lot of the time, I mean, sometimes it can be really convincing and you start to question everything, but you ultimately know what you're doing is illogical. But it just feels too scary to stop.
Got you. Right. Something we spoke about before we started recording over a coffee was the backdoor spike.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wondered what that is. It sounds very exciting. I want a backdoor spike. Well, I don't know where that's going. No pun intended there.
I don't. It's not a fun time. It's right. When, as you start to recover from OCD and you start, you're saying maybe, and you're living life by your values, and I think living life by values and not by fear is really important. Making decisions based on values rather than fear is a key. But as you start to get better, OCD is obviously not going to like that. It wants your attention and it wants your time. So it will try anything. It will start throwing all of its toys at the pram. It will try anything to keep you stuck. So maybe it can sound like, if you're no longer getting anxious about something that used to be really distressing, it can then say, oh, but hold on, but why aren't you anxious anymore? This is really worrying. Like, does this mean that actually you're not a good person, and maybe you were lying about having OCD the whole time, and hold on, wait a minute now, like, why aren't you anxious? What does this mean that you're not anxious anymore? Or it will try and tell you that if you don't do the compulsion, well, because you shouldn't, because it's going to aid your recovery, then it was, that's really, I think I said earlier, that's really irresponsible if you don't do that, that's really bad of you. But again, you can just treat that with maybe it is. Right. It's always just letting the doubt kind of be there and just sitting with it, which is really unpleasant, but ultimately that's how your world's going to get bigger.
Absolutely. So what does a good day for Georgia look like now? Sort of talk me through sort of what you would call a good day, because obviously your recovery's come on leaps and bounds since that 1 o'clock in the morning on that New Year's Eve. Sort of talk us through, I mean, on a good day, I mean, I don't want to say it's gone away, but is it very, very low level, or is it sort of a case of sort of gentle maintenance through the day on a good day?
I mean, you have to, I think, always, I'm in a place where I'm always trying to go against what it says, and I'm trying to do the scary things. I think I'm lucky, largely, it's got to a place where, I can live pretty happily. Like I'm doing all right, which is really lovely. But especially, when you look back, and I used to have to, if I wanted to throw one thing away, I'd have to get, if it was like a receipt or something, I'd turn it over, turn it back, turn it over, turn it back. I mean, it would take me about 10 minutes to throw one piece of paper away, hold it up to the light. So, life is much easier now. The past couple of weeks, I think I mentioned earlier, it has been getting a little bit, it's been a bit louder. I'm not loving it. But that's, I think I also, maybe I said earlier, maybe not, but like recovery isn't linear. You're gonna, it's it's a journey, but hopefully, even if it's a journey that isn't like, it's like that, but it's on an upwards trajectory, I hope. So there's going to be dips, but it's still going up.
Is it similar to sort of recovery from addiction in the sense that, you've got to be careful around getting enough sleep, not being too stressed, not sort of letting worries build up? Well, I mean, obviously that's a big key part of, there's certain things that people from addiction recovery are sort of constantly mindful for, like one is like practicing gratitude and things like that. Do you find if you let those things slip, that voice, as you call it, gets louder? Like if you sort of neglect, I don't know, exercise and sleep and things like that?
I think obviously like things like sleep and exercise are probably going to be beneficial. A lot of people, they say you can have problems around, it can affect anything. So even going to exercise might be tricky for you. Getting to sleep might be tricky for you. So it's hard. But the thing that's difficult is you're saying like avoiding stress, and which is obviously like that would be good. But part of OCD recovery, when you're doing these exposures, is incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
And you sort of have to, in order to get to that place where you're making your world bigger, unfortunately, part of the therapy for that really is making yourself stressed and then not doing the compulsions.
Sure.
So, but you know, in the long run, that will be less stressful. I think I had a really interesting thing the other day, because I know when I'm doing compulsions, like I couldn't touch food for 4 years. Really, I couldn't really cook anything. Like I had to, you know, eat with wrappers and anyway. But then I knew that as I started to eat with my hands, like I can eat with my hands now. And as I started to do that, I knew I was doing that. It would be very scary, but I knew I was doing that so that I became less anxious. But then a mad thing happened to me last year. I was at my friend's house eating a packet of crisps. And I got to the bottom of the packet and I realised that I hadn't actually thought about it before I opened the packet. And I know that sounds really silly, but I knew that all this stuff I was doing was so I got to the point where I was less anxious. But I forgot actually the goal is you just don't even think about it.
Right.
That's the point you're getting to.
Yeah.
Like I'd always, you know, I'd be opening like whatever it might be and thinking, oh God, I've got to eat this with my hands. But I'd be doing it because I got better at it. But I forgot that actually the aim is you don't even think about it at all. Absolutely. And that was quite freeing to remember that.
Well, they say, don't they, in most Eastern philosophies, that the state of nirvana and bliss is when your thoughts actually cease and there's nothing there at all, and that's apparently nirvana or bliss. It's something that I'm definitely working towards. Just very, very finally, because Vauxhall Podcast Studio, big shout out to you, being incredibly kind to us today. Taking it back, actually not about OCD for a second. Say there's someone listening to this who's just suffering with really bad anxiety. Obviously, someone you're someone who's been there and done that on a much bigger scale. If someone's sort of going through that now, any sort of tips or advice for someone who's just really stuck in anxiety, rumination, and worry? Is there any sort of words of wisdom for them? I appreciate that's a hard question.
I think remembering that thoughts aren't facts.
Yeah.
That thoughts are just thoughts. They don't mean anything about you as a person. And it sounds really cliche, but it will and can get better. And I think that's just like it will improve. You know, I was in a place where I really didn't believe that was possible. And it can.
Absolutely.
I promise.
I think it's one of the big lies that anxiety tells you, isn't it? Is that you're going to feel like this forever.
And that's it's not true.
And
it lies all the time.
Everything in life, acting careers, jobs, parts, mental health, joy, everything passes. Everything's in a state of flux.
Yeah.
And good things pass, bad things pass. And it's amazing how long it took me to learn that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
All of that. It really, really did. Georgia, thank you so much for coming down today.
So
I told you she was glittering, didn't I? And gorgeous and great and every other G word I can think of. Huge thanks for coming down.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so lovely.
It's going to help so many people. You talking about this?
I hope so.
So I hope everyone got as much out of it as I certainly did, and everyone in this studio did. Please head to the show notes now. I'm going to be putting links where you can follow Georgia and lots of other links and exciting things and more interesting stuff around OCD and other things we've talked about. So please go there now. I should have said this at the beginning. If you're listening to this or watching this, whether it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube, hit subscribe, follow, give me 5 stars, write a review. That really, really helps and it means the world. And in return, I promise, and I haven't let you down yet, to release a new episode every 2 weeks on a Tuesday. Georgia, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
And thank you to you, and I will see you next time. Thank you.